The reading of my parents' will should have been a solemn occasion, but Dale's cruel laughter shattered any sense of decorum. "Well, well, the good daughter loses again," he sneered, basking in the shock radiating from my face. Mr. Jennings, our family lawyer, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "I understand this is a difficult situation, Lorraine, but per your parents' explicit instructions, the bulk of their estate, the investment portfolio, cash assets, and beach house is to be transferred to Dale." I struggled to process the words, a cold numbness spreading through my body. But the vineyard? Surely they left me that at least? My voice cracked with desperation. Dale barked out another harsh laugh. "Are you kidding? You get the ramshackle family home and their little vanity project, that run-down vineyard that's been bleeding money for years." He leaned back smugly. "I'm finally getting what I deserve after being the black sheep for so long." The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd sacrificed my youth, my dreams, to be the ever-devoted daughter caring for our sick parents without complaint, all while Dale drifted from city to city, gambling away any money he could get his hands on. Mr. Jennings gave me a pitying look as he slid the paperwork across the desk. "I'm so sorry, Lorraine. This was their final wish, as difficult as it is." Dale stood abruptly, already counting the windfall in his mind. "Don't worry, sis. I'll keep a piece of that vineyard as a reminder of your failure." His grating laugh echoed down the marbled hallway as he sauntered out. I stared at the paperwork, the printed words swimming before my eyes. One unkind decision had erased decades of my selfless acts. The cherry on top of my imploding life, Dale inheriting the fortune while I was left with crumbs and a sinking ship of a business. Gripping the documents, I found my resolve hardening. If my parents wanted to reward the black sheep, so be it. But I would not allow Dale's greed and arrogance to render my sacrifices meaningless. With every ounce of determination, I vowed to revive the vineyard and make it thrive. My throat burned with decades of swallowed pride, but I would no longer accept being diminished and stepped on. This might be a twisted legacy, but I would honor it through my own perseverance, not for my parents, not for their misplaced faith in Dale. This revival would be for me, an act of defiant redemption against those who had ground me into the dirt for far too long. As I exited Mr. Jennings' office and strode into the sunlight, I could almost taste the bittersweet triumph of success already emerging from the soil. Dale's gloating laughter would one day be drowned out by the roar of my ultimate victory. The drive back to the rundown family home was a blur. I pulled up to the dilapidated two-story house, taking in the chipped paint and overgrown weeds choking the path. This ramshackle place was now my sole inheritance, a twisted joke. Grabbing the tattered deed, I shoved open the front door, the musty scent of decay assailing my nostrils. I surveyed the living room, my gaze landing on a dusty photo of Dale and me as children, his arm casually slung over my shoulders with that infuriatingly smug grin. A red haze washed over me, and I hurled the deed across the room, the papers scattering like fallen leaves. That arrogant bastard. The bitterness poured out in a scream of anguish. Memories came flooding back, decades of thankless servitude, while Dale blew in and out of our lives like a hurricane, leaving devastation in his wake. Yet, in the end, he reaped the rewards meant for me. "Screw this!" I snatched up the photo, hurling it against the wall where the glass shattered spectacularly. "I won't let your betrayal break me." Fists clenched, I stormed out the back door, driven by a simmering rage. I found myself standing before the neglected vineyard, a once vibrant source of joy for my parents that had withered into a decrepit graveyard of gnarled vines and parched soil. In that moment, everything became clear. This derelict land would be my path to redemption, my middle finger to Dale and the injustices inflicted upon me. I would pour every ounce of my being into resurrecting this vineyard, not just for myself, but to spite those who had tried to bury me. I grabbed a rusted trowel lying amid the weeds and began hacking away at the tangled roots, sweat beading on my brow as I lost myself in the punishing physical labor, each swing a furious revolt against my crumbling reality. The blisters were worth it, the aching muscles a welcome distraction. I would revive this vineyard through sheer force of will, and one day Dale would choke on his perceived victory as I claimed mine. Exhaustion eventually overtook me, and I collapsed beside the first cleared vines, chest heaving. But as the sun began its descent, I felt an ember of hope flicker to life in my soul. One calloused hand brushed against the withered grapes clinging to the vines, and I knew in that moment that my life's purpose would be growing from this forsaken plot of land. No longer would I accept being disrespected and disregarded. My name was Lorraine, and by God, I would make it mean something again. The days and weeks that followed blurred into a relentless grind. My life became a singular devotion, reviving the decimated vineyard that clutched at my ragged soul like a lifeline. I awoke each dawn to the ache of protesting muscles, emerging from the decrepit family home to lose myself amidst the parched vines and hardened soil. Money drained from my meager savings at an alarming rate as I purchased fertilizers, tools, and equipment to aid in my arduous toil. More than once, well-meaning neighbors stopped by, brows creased with concern. "Lorraine, honey, maybe it's time to let this hobby farm die a dignified death," Margie tutted, wringing her hands. I straightened from where I knelt, grimacing at the protest in my lower back. "It's not a hobby, Margie." My voice was a gravely rasp, dehydrated from long hours beneath the scorching sun. "This is my life now." The old widow's eyes widened at the feverish zeal burning in my gaze before she shuffled away, murmuring a prayer under her breath. I was too far gone to care about others' opinions of my obsession. This land, this vineyard, it was all I had left. Some days, I feared madness had taken root alongside the tender green shoots finally unfurling. When the relentless summer storms rolled in, I spent hours in the muddy fields, frantically shoring up vines and pumping out the flooded irrigation trenches with a ruptured sump pump. On those nights, I curled up in the dank tool shed, clothes plastered to my shivering form, massaging cramped hands and fantasizing about Dal's face when he realized I wouldn't go down without an earth-shattering fight. The deranged laughter that burst from my cracked lips those nights likely cemented the town's perception of my spiraling descent into unhinged insanity. Nature itself seemed hell-bent on annihilating my efforts, from Cabernet-devouring insects to merciless hailstorms that shredded entire trellises in minutes. Each morning after such assaults, I surveyed the damage with a hollow detachment before hurling myself at the ravaged earth to rebuild and replant, again and again. Even when funds dwindled perilously, I refused to surrender, bartering away possessions and taking demeaning jobs like scrubbing toilets to scrounge up cash to keep my makeshift operations afloat. Exhaustion became my constant companion, coupled with the obsessive drive not to let this fledgling chance at redemption wither on the vine. Some nights, I curled on the ground amid the gnarled vines, spent and aching, brooding on memories of Dale's cruelties, his mocking laughter, his sneering digs at my spinsterhood while he squandered every opportunity. Those blazing coals of hatred fueled my determination to show him, once and for all, my fortitude could no longer be disregarded and crushed underfoot. From the charred ashes of my former life, a new Ani would be forged, emboldened, hardened, unstoppable. The first delicate buds appeared like gems after that brutal winter, vivid green fractals unfurling to greet the warm spring sunshine. I cradled the tender shoots in my calloused palms, a sense of awe and renewal swelling in my chest. This gritty resurrection was far from over, but those buds represented the first tangible fruits of my suffering, proof that sheer, mulish determination could defy the cruelest of circumstances. Well, if it ain't Cinderella tending to her garden. The mocking drawl instantly withered the tender buds of hope blooming within me. I snapped upright to see Dale swaggering along the neat rows, his designer loafers muddied. "Get off my land!" The words sliced from my chapped lips like shards of glass. His garish shirt, no doubt purchased with our parents' fortune, strained across his pot-belly as he brayed out a contemptuous laugh. "Your land? In case you've forgotten, little sister, I own this dirt along with everything else." In 2 strides I was inches from his sneering face, shovel-gripped white-knuckle tight. "You arrogant son of a—" Ah, Dale waggled a pudgy finger. "That's no way to talk to your benefactor, is it? After all, I've allowed you to play princess of this pathetic patch." My knuckles ached to reshape his smug features, but I refused to grant him that satisfaction. "What do you want, Dale?" I bit out each word, "just popping by to see how my charity case is coming along." His piggish eyes raked over the pristine young vines. "Though I must admit, you've done better than I expected, Lo. This actually looks like it might become profitable. A bloom of dread sprouted in my gut at the speculative gleam in his gaze. He was here to stake his claim, leeching off the seeds I had nurtured with my blood and sweat. Sure enough, he rubbed his stubby hands together like a B-movie villain. You know, as the sole owner, I'd be well within my rights to demand a hefty percentage of any proceeds, wouldn't you agree? Red crept into the corners of my vision. Like hell you will. The words hissed through my clenched jaw as I took one menacing step closer, the shovel now inches from his pampered face. For a fleeting instant, Dale's bravado wavered, a glimpse of the cowering child who used to cringe from my shadow whenever I stood up to his cruelties. But the shadow soon passed, and his chin jutted out again with feigned bravado. You watch yourself, Lo. That temper will be your downfall. His piggy eyes narrowed to slits as he leaned in, reeking of costly cologne and hubris. Don't forget who's in control here. This is just the start, and Mama and Daddy's money has already run dry for me, thanks to some poor investments. My heart plummeted as his meaning crystallized. He would try to rip away this one chance at redemption, leeching off my triumphs like the parasite he was. But as his wheezing laughter faded into the distance, I felt that defiant spark rekindle in my soul. I clutched the tender vines to my chest, heedless of their scratching barbs. This vineyard was my life's blood, and Dale could try to steal that from my cold, dead hands. No more cowering, no more surrendering my spirit. I would bury the vindictive bastard in success so complete, so beautifully poetic, that he choked on the bitter taste of his own defeat. The weeks after Dale's crude visit passed in a blur of frantic activity. I transformed into a relentless force of nature, my every waking moment dedicated to fortifying the vineyard's defenses. Security cameras and perimeter lighting were installed. A retired police dog, a snarling beast aptly named Brutus, patrolled the fields day and night, ready to shred any intruders to ribbons on my command. I'd be damned if I'd let that weasel Dale slither in and desecrate the delicate lifeblood pulsing through these vines after all my toil. If he wanted a fight, I'd give him a war. Margie stopped by one sweltering afternoon, shielding her eyes against the blazing sun as she surveyed the vineyard's metamorphosis with poorly concealed alarm. Good heavens, Lorraine, this place looks more like a military compound than a vineyard these days. She flinched as Brutus's booming barks echoed across the fields. I gave the snarling canine's flanks an affectionate pat, unconcerned. Whatever it takes to protect my investment, I stated flatly, daring her to object. The widow's withered hand fluttered to her throat as her eyes traced the newly installed security perimeter and floodlights. But from who, honey? This level of paranoia can't be healthy. I whirled on her, fists clenched. Years of batting away her well-meaning pity bubbled up in a surge of blistering resentment. You think this is paranoia? That bloated sack of shit who calls himself my brother seems to think he can slither in and try to steal the fruits of my sacrifice. I was nearly shouting now, nostrils flared. Well, he's got one hell of a reckoning coming if he tries. Margie's eyes widened and she took a step backwards, gripping the faded gingham of her dress. My, Lorraine, I've never seen you like this before. Then you've never seen me survive before, I growled through gritted teeth. She swallowed hard, a tremor running through her frail frame. For a moment I felt a pang of regret at my outburst, but the white-hot defiance burned away any semblance of restraint. If Margie couldn't handle this side of me, that was her loss. This was the fires of my redemption being stoked, and I would let nothing and no one douse those flames. I should go. Margie's voice was barely above a terrified whisper as she backpedaled towards her car. You do that, I called after her retreating form. And tell anyone else around here with good intentions to stay the hell away from my vineyard. The squeal of her tires seemed to punctuate the severing of her friendship, yet another casualty in this brutal, uphill battle. I felt a strange sense of lightness at having shed that anchor. No more would I pacify the mushy sensibilities of small-town busybodies too frail to embrace the ruthless self-preservation required for triumph over adversity. They could whisper and tut behind cup palms all they wanted. My vineyard stood as a bristling bulwark against their judgments, and against any further effort by my worm of a brother to leech away at my rebirth. This land was my dominion, and Dale would rue the day he drunkenly scrawled his signature on those damnable inheritance papers. A cruel smile played across my lips as I surveyed my fortified kingdom, visions of Dale's comeuppance dancing in my mind's eye like beautiful mirages. He would learn the true depths of my determination soon enough, and the reckoning would be as sweet as the first perfect batch of vintage I'd uncork in the face of his devastation. The rich, earthy aroma of the first harvest wafted through the air, sweet, tantalizing tendrils that represented years of agonizing sacrifice finally bearing fruit. I stood amid the vineyards, drinking in the scene of workers carefully snipping plump clusters from the vines, handling them like precious jewels. My jewels, battered and scarred from the turmoil that had birthed them, yet now glistening with the first radiant rays of success. Soon, the heady perfume of fermentation would permeate the air as these grapes transmuted into my vineyard's inaugural vintage. Just the thought sparked tremors of vindication. Grunting from exertion, I lifted another tub of grapes, savoring their lush weight, when a familiar nasal whine grated my senses. "You just can't stop rubbing it in, can you?" Dale lumbered between the rows, already sweating through his garish silk shirt from the autumn heat. I rolled my eyes but remained silent, awaiting the inevitable barrage of insults and delusional diatribes about how this triumph was rightly his. "Don't give me the silent treatment, Lorraine." He spat out my name like a rotten fruit. "You think you've won, but this is just the start." His meaty fists clenched and unclenched as he struggled to find the words. I felt a twinge of satisfaction that, for once, I had rendered the arrogant blowhard speechless. "Well, spit it out, Dale," I goaded, unable to resist twisting the knife. Red splotches mottled his cheeks, and for a fleeting instant I thought he might actually strike me before some shred of self-restraint kicked in. "You smug bitch," he hissed through clenched teeth. "This!" He swung his arm in an expansive, sweeping gesture at the vineyards. "All of this is mine. My inheritance." He jabbed a finger into my sternum, forcing me back a step, and I'll be damned if I let you wrest it from me after all the suffering you put our family through with your self-righteous martyr act all these years. A harsh laugh erupted from my lips before I could stop it. "Suffering? You mean the suffering caused by your gambling debts and shiftless lifestyle?" Dale's face purpled, and for a moment I thought he might spontaneously combust before he drew a couple of ragged breaths. "Whatever. The fact is, you had no legal right to all of this." He jabbed his finger again for emphasis. "No right at all." I opened my mouth, but he steamrolled over any response. "So consider this your first and only warning, sis." His fetid breath washed over me, tinged with the sourness of desperation and alcohol. "Give me what's mine, or I'll take it by whatever means necessary." Plucking a plump grape from the nearby bin, I locked eyes with him as I ground it between my fingers, savoring the burst of sweet juice and pulpy flesh. "You're right, Dale. This is rightfully yours." He blinked, clearly caught off guard by my easy agreement. Leaning in until our faces were mere inches apart, I allowed a single rivulet of purpled grape essence to slowly trace down my wrist. This land, this bounty, it was all a gift from our loving parents to their favorite, most deserving child. My lips peeled back in a parody of a grin. A gift they ripped from my tenacious hands and bestowed upon their shriveled, ungrateful fuck-up of a son. Dale recoiled, nostrils flaring at the caustic venom lacing every syllable. "So by all means, come take what's yours," I purred, savoring his impotent fury. "I'll be waiting for you to try, brother dear." With that, I turned on my heel and marched away, leaving him sputtering amidst the vines slowly withering into the chill of evening. They said revenge was a dish best served cold. But years in the making, this act of vengeance would be a furious inferno of retribution, one I hoped would reduce Dale's pathetic life to smoldering ash. The guttural snarl of Brutus's barks shattered the stillness of the pre-dawn darkness. I bolted upright in bed, senses instantly alert to the bestial ferocity echoing from the vineyards. Grabbing the baseball bat beside my bed, I charged out into the inky shadows, the colossal dog's furious roars rapidly growing in volume. Halfway across the field, the floodlights activated with a blinding brilliance, revealing the horrific scene. Rows upon rows of gnarled, desiccated vines, as if a rampaging army had torn through and pillaged everything in their path. No, The strangled whisper escaped my constricted throat as Brutus's barks crescendoed in my ears. A blur of movement at the edge of the illumination snapped me back to reality. I surged forward, bat gripped in a knuckle-whitening grip, to find the dog frantically lunging and clawing at the chain-link barrier separating my land from the county road. On the other side, the terrified and unmistakable visage of Dale scrambled backwards, hands shielding his face from the frenzied canine's snapping jaws as he fled in a drunken stagger. White-hot rage propelled me forward. I slammed the release on the gate and Brutus exploded through, giving pursuit as Dale flung himself into a rusted Camaro and peeled away in a shower of gravel. "That way! Get him!" I screamed uselessly over the roar of the engine as dog and car vanished in opposite directions. My limbs moved on autopilot, carrying me deeper into the wake of unimaginable devastation. Mile after mile of healthy green vines lay desecrated, reduced to twisted, scorched husks weeping desiccated tendrils onto the furrowed soil. This was not mere sabotage, it was a holocaust, an utter annihilation of everything I'd poured my soul into resurrecting from the ashes. Yet even as bile rose in my throat, engulfed by the acrid stench of charred vegetation, an ember of hope smoldered amidst the ash. Dale had been there. His presence was proof of his culpability in this atrocity. Reinvigorated, I began meticulously documenting the carnage with my phone, capturing every scrap of evidence from discarded cigarette butts to the boot prints seared into the parched earth by the inferno that had clearly raged here. By the time the first fingers of dawn crept over the horizon, hours had passed, but I'd assembled an unshakable case to unleash the full force of justice upon Dale's miserable hide. The county sheriff arrived with his deputies in tow just as I finished, expressions grim as they surveyed the apocalyptic scene. His face took on a sickly pallor at the extent of the wanton destruction. Then his gaze met mine, puffy and rimmed with soot, and understanding crept in. "Ma'am, was this—" I silently handed over my phone gallery with the timeline of evidence. The lawman's jaw clenched, giving a solemn nod before barking orders to seal off the area and coordinate with local arson investigators. His tone brooked no argument. This crime scene demanded nothing less than a full-scale, interagency call-out. Hours later, swaddled in a shock blanket as crews tromped through the devastated fields, I felt the familiar warm weight of Brutus's head on my knee. Meeting his doleful gaze, I gently stroked his cobbled fur. "I will find who did this, girl," I murmured, soaked in the stench of my adversary's despicable handiwork. "And when I do, I'll bury those demons in justice so searing, hell itself will look like a cool breeze." With those words, new fires of resolve ignited in the smoldering remains of my charred soul. This act of annihilation would not be Dale's victory, but the powder keg flashpoint that finally consumed his worthless existence in divine retribution. One way or another, reckoning would have its day. The heavy thunk of the gavel seemed to reverberate through my very bones as the judge leveled his stern gaze at the shackled form of Dale. "In light of the overwhelming evidence against you, including DNA samples from the crime scene, eyewitness testimony, and your own sloppy attempts at an alibi, this court finds you guilty." My hands clenched the bench, knuckles whitening as I awaited the words I'd yearned to hear. "Of arson, criminal mischief, and destruction of property and assets exceeding $5 million. You are hereby sentenced to 20 years in a state penitentiary, with possibility of parole after serving 18. A ragged gasp escaped Dale's trembling lips, the color draining from his ruddy face as the reality crashed over him. 20 years. A veritable life sentence for the sack of bloat who'd squandered every opportunity with reckless depravity. My lips peeled back in a feral grin as his haunted gaze found mine. I held it, letting the burning retribution in my stare bore into his crumbling facade before giving the slightest shake of my head. The realization that this systematic immolation was just the opening salvo in his world unraveling washed over Dale in crashing waves. He recoiled, mouth moving soundlessly as the bailiff swarmed, wrenching his flabby arms behind his back and marching him away forever. The tang of justice had never tasted so intoxicatingly sweet. As the courtroom emptied, I remained seated, savoring the silence and letting the weight of this culmination settle in my core. After so many years of anguish, desolation, and scorching the earth with my rage, the cycle of anguish had finally transcended. Exhaustion quickly followed, leaving me hollowed yet strangely at peace. I was free from the trauma and familial shackles that had stifled my potential for far too long. Fresh beginnings had been a bitter, uphill battle, but the summit was finally in sight. A warm weight on my shoulders startled me, and I glanced over at Eric, my lawyer and steadfast ally these past brutal months. "Congratulations, Lorraine." His words were a low rumble, heavy with understanding of how momentous this victory resonated. "The justice you fought for is finally served." I opened my mouth to offer platitudes of thanks, but Eric raised his hand, quieting me. "But my work here isn't done quite yet, not if you'll have me." He plucked a sealed manila envelope from his briefcase and extended it toward me. "This is the next step in your reckoning." Brow furrowing, I accepted the parcel, giving it an experimental shake. Something shifted inside with a faint clink of glass on glass. At Eric's nod of approval, I cracked the seal and slid out a sleek, elegant bottle filled with a ruby liquid that could only be one thing: the debut vintage of my Vineyard's revival, still aging to perfection even after the devastation. My breath caught as I cradled the vessel, tracing the embossed label with a reverent fingertip. So much sacrifice, so much torment, crystallized into this humble glass flask, my greatest achievement and Dale's greatest downfall. "By all means," Eric murmured. "You've earned this moment more than anyone I know." With a trembling hand, I twisted the cork free and brought the bottle to my lips, throwing my head back as I allowed the first sublime mouthful to roll over my tongue and awaken every sense. The rich, mature body with hints of dark fruit and smoke blossomed in rapturous waves, setting my palate alight. This was ambrosia, the sweetest, most decadent nectar I could ever conceive. But beyond the taste was something deeper, more visceral and elemental: joy, redemption, and a profound, lingering bitterness that transcended mere flavors. This was the taste of vengeance finally achieved, served ice-cold and brimming with the ashes of Dale's miserable, pathetic existence. Essence of rictus grinned as this potent revelation surged through me. After decades of oppression and torment, the ultimate karma had blossomed from the soils I'd watered with my tears and sweat, justice and deliverance personified in liquid form. I would savor each and every delectable drop, letting it anoint me while bathing in the glorious retribution I had seized for myself. Every time I uncorked a bottle, I would toast to Dale's demise and my hard-won rebirth. This was the first draught of many to come from the cup of long-delayed redemption I had harvested with my own 2 hands. And oh, how ruddy and bountiful those fruits tasted upon